special official funeral, Category 1, for former ambassador to Cuba and ANC stalwart John Nkadimeng got underway at 7 o'clock this morning at his home in Cuba on the East of Johannesburg. The cortege, as you saw, left the home and heading now to Marks Park. I went across now firstly to Abongile, Dumako. Samkele Maseko is standing by in Marks Park. Abongile, very good morning to you. What are you seeing there?
Good morning, Blaine. We are coming to you from the home of the late struggle icon in that day, John Nkadimeng, here in Cuba, north of Johannesburg. This is where a procession going to, a Max Park Sports Center in Randburg has just left about 5 minutes ago, heading to where the venue, to where the actual funeral service is going to take place, which is where, of course, we are expecting President Cyril Ramaphosa to deliver a eulogy. Certainly, ahead of that procession leaving the house, since we got here around 6 o'clock this morning, we've seen quite a number of dignitaries coming here to pay their last respect, attending, of course, that family prayer service, which took place at around 7:30. We saw the SACP's Solima Baila. We did also see Ace Makashule, the Secretary General of the ANC, and of course Jackson Mthembu, the Minister in the Presidency, among those who were here to actually pay respect to John Nkadimeng. Of course, as Ace Makashule, as one of the leaders of the ANC, which was the political home of the late struggle icon, having handed over to the wife of Nkadimeng that ANC flag, as per the tradition of the party. Of course, just preceding that was, of course, the procession going now to the Max Park Sports Center, where the funeral service will take place. Certainly, Blaine, as you were saying in your introduction, a giant has indeed fallen, a struggle icon who would never back down from the apartheid era government, who made it a point that he will do whatever it takes to see, the rights of ordinary South Africans being, given the honor that they deserve in this South African soil. And ambassador, he was an ambassador, we know, Blaine, to Cuba for South Africa. Somebody who also stood firm for the rights of the ordinary workers of South Africa, a unionist indeed. So we expect this official funeral service, Category 1 of Ndade John Nkadimeng, to take place at about 10 o'clock at the Max Park Sports Center, which will also be followed by a burial service, which will take place indeed at the West Park Cemetery later this morning.
He was described as warm, caring, a modest person, very affable. That's some of the sentiments that you get when you hear some of the tributes being paid to Nkadimeng. The SACP's Solly Mapaile described Nkadimeng as a Category 1 revolutionary, saying he spoke a lot about patriotism, the love for one's country, and what it means, I guess, to defend the land. And no doubt, Abongile has left a huge void. Is that the sentiment you're hearing on the ground?
Looking at the caliber of people who've made their way here, Blaine, certainly one can conclude that really there's a huge void that John Nkadimeng is living within the tripartite alliance. SACP's Solima Baila, of course, speaking to us on the sidelines of the service that took place earlier on, saying that he actually is feeling the pinch. He actually sort of feels that something is just been, left a void. Something is like something needs to have been done, maybe just ahead of his passing, in honoring him more for the good things that he has done. And of course, Zingi Swalosi, the president of COSATU, whom will be the program director during the funeral service, signals the importance of the role that he played in making sure that workers in the country are being protected in all aspects. We also know that he did partake as the Secretary General of the then SAGTU, which was the trade union then, to make sure that he champions the workers' right, to make sure that he champions the ordinary people's rights of South Africa under that difficult time of apartheid in South Africa. John Nkadimeng, of course, being honored by President Cyril Ramaphosa just last year with the Isitwalandwe Siaparangwe, which is the highest order that one can be given within the ruling party. We were here right at this house, Blaine Hammond, as the SABC, witnessing that event. President Cyril Ramaphosa saying that he is grateful for the role he has played in liberating South Africa. Somebody who went all out from a very young age. We also know that he was from Limpopo,
Yes.
moved here after primary school,
Abongile,
and he started his political career.
Abongile, we
as a
are
soft
just
steward.
looking at, sorry to come in there, we are just looking at live visuals now of President Cyril Ramaphosa arriving. We understand at Marks Park for the funeral service. As you've mentioned, he will be delivering the eulogy. That's at around just after 11 o'clock or so. So we will go there as soon as we can. But I want to get a sense, before we get to Samkele Maseko, I want to get a sense from you, Abongile, with regards to back in 1995, August 1995, Nkadimeng was appointed as South Africa's ambassador to Cuba. Talk to us about his stint there.
Certainly in 1995, former president, the late Dr. Nelson Mandela, assigning Dr. Nkadimeng to go and represent South Africa in Cuba, a country that has got a long history with South Africa. There's a lot of diplomatic ties between the two countries. Dr. Nkadimeng spent a couple of years there with his family, making it a point that trade relations and diplomatic relations between the two countries were at an advanced stage. Of course, receiving a round of applause, if you like, from the ANC, which is the governing party, for the role he has played in making it a point that, at least as we are here today, relations between South Africa and Cuba are at a very advanced stage, which is why perhaps we saw that arrival of the Cuban doctors who came here to actually assist in the fight against the coronavirus. It signals that the likes of him and Dr. Nkadimeng, having spent some time in that part of the world, has yielded the much needed positive results in as far as the relations are concerned. So, as a diplomat, he's been described as somebody who was fearless, who knew what was right for the country, who knew what needed to be done for the country to advance socially, economically, and otherwise, which is reflective of what we've seen since we've gotten here at his house in Q, north of Johannesburg. A lot of people saying that they are proud to have had a chance to, interact with this giant that has fallen, to have had some time to spend with him and get a sense, or rather, to learn about the history of the country, and of course, and his role as an ambassador who represented the country in Cuba. As a former exile, as a former person who spent some time in exile as well in Eswatini, Namibia and Mozambique, so it was quite befitting for President Nelson Mandela to appoint him to go and represent the country further afield, which is now Cuba.
Yeah, no doubt. Ambassador Nkadimeng leaves a huge void, but he also leaves an important legacy. He dedicated his life to the mission of equality and dignity, and no doubt we're going to hear much, much more with regards to the life and times of Nkadimeng during the funeral service. This is where we go now. Abongile, stand by. I'll come back to you in a short while. I want to bring in now Samkele Maseko, live for us in Marks Park. Samkele, very good morning to you. The SACP's Solly Mapaile, yesterday, or one of the days, I remember him saying, and he described Nkadimeng as incorruptible. And it seems that this was a strong anti-corruption message that coursed through many of the tributes in the lead up to this funeral service. So is that what you picked up as well?
Yes, indeed, Blaine. Dr. Nkadimeng has been described as a person of incredible integrity and man of impeccable knowledge who was.
All right, it seems that we lost Samkele. We'll try to re-dial him. He's live for us in Marks Park. We had earlier visuals of President Cyril Ramaphosa getting out of his car at Marks Park. For some reason, we saw visuals of him getting back into his car. So we'll just clarify that with Samkele Maseko. Samkele, very good morning to you. You back on the line. You can hear us loud and clear, yeah?
Okay. Yes, indeed, Blaine. The president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, has arrived here. He is currently seated in his vehicle, which transported him here to this semi-Marks Park, where the official funeral will take place, where the president will deliver the eulogy. He is here. He did arrive about 10 minutes ago. The family has not yet arrived, and the cortege, which left the family home, where where our colleague Abongile Dumako has not yet arrived as well. That's why the president is currently seated in his vehicle. You did see those visuals earlier on of him leaving the vehicle and going towards the hall where the official prayer service will take place for this funeral of the struggle stalwart John Nkadimeng, who's been described as incorruptible by Solima Paila, the Deputy Secretary General of the South African Communist Party.
You know, Nkadimeng's generation were products of the struggle. They knew what pain and what suffering was all about. From your experience as a political reporter, Samkele, what gave that pantheon of leaders the courage and the strength to fight the good fight and get into good trouble, as the late John Lewis used to say? What drove them? What's your sense?
Political freedom for this country was one of their most missions that they embarked on to give this country the political freedom that we have. They were inspired by other political formations within the African continent. They looked at the deplorable conditions, the segregation that the African people were facing within the continent, the racial segregation that was there. These were some of the things that motivated them to spearhead the liberation struggle. You look at the various generation that is administrating the political freedom that we have, and the current struggles that the country is faced with, which is economic exclusion. These are some of the issues that plague them over the years. You look at how he has been described as an incorruptible leader. Yeah. You look at the other struggle stalwarts that have fallen, and the influence and that they've had in the liberation struggle in shaping the direction of the African National Congress, shaping the direction of the Congress movement as a whole, and the trade union movement, essentially, which Nkadimeng was one of the founding members.
All right, we do apologize. The link to Samkele is not stable at this time. We'll try to, I think he's back. Samkele, you can hear us again. Please continue your thought.
Okay. You look at the role that the likes of Nkadimeng have played, particularly within the Congress movement, in shaping it and building COSATU to one of the strongest unions, Congress formations that there was within the world. You look at the role that they've played in shaping the likes of other unions within the Congress movement and within COSATU, the likes of NUM and the likes of NUMSA. You look at the role that they've played in conscientizing, particularly the working class, to join the struggle and to be joined in the mass democratic movement. You look at the various accolades that Nkadimeng held and how he was elected into the Politburo of the South African Communist Party in 2007, which was arguably one of the most volatile periods when it comes to South Africa's political life post-democracy. You look at the various issues that were plaguing the governing party at the time during the divisions that were there between President Mbeki and the former Deputy President and former President of the Republic of South Africa and the ANC, Jacob Zuma, and the role that those stalwarts played in trying to build and to forge unity within the trade union movement.
Yeah. Nkadimeng was then the underground South African Congress of Trade Unions. He led that movement, that formation, and he also played an instrumental role, Samkele, in the formation of COSATU. We understand that the program director today is Zingiswa Losi.
Yes, indeed. The president of COSATU today is a woman, the first woman president of that particular Congress trade union movement, which is COSATU. She also has taken the reins from the likes of John Nkadimeng, who were the founding fathers of this trade union movement, COSATU. You go to the likes of Elijah Bahai, who worked with Nkadimeng. You go to Cyril Ramaphosa as well, the current president of the Republic of South Africa, his role that he had in the formation of the National Union of Mine Workers. because all of these particular leaders that you are seeing within the South African political sphere did in some way, all of them work with John Nkadimeng, whether it be within the African National Congress, in the South African Communist Party, or within the trade union movement, that would be COSATU. You look at the likes of Gwede Mantashe, whom also gave the lecture on Nkadimeng, well, in that memorial service that the African National Congress had during the week. And you look at the role of how he described Nkadimeng having played within the trade union movement in building them as shop stewards and building them as worker leaders in the country. You can't divorce the role that Nkadimeng had in forming COSATU, in liberating the workers and speaking on worker issues, and also conscientizing the workers of the political situation that is currently unfolding in South Africa, and the massive role that they played in shaping the mass democratic movement and the United Democratic Front, which was the spearhead of the liberation struggle when former liberation movements like the African National Congress, like the PAC, were banned by the apartheid government.
Corruption, very much topical. You've heard it in many of the tributes that have been paid to Nkadimeng, not only him, but also during the memorial services as well as the funeral service of Andrew Mlangeni. People are calling for action against corruption. There are risks and costs to action, but they are far less than the long-range risks of comfortable inaction. It's a quote attributed to
indeed.
John F. Kennedy. And you know, many people are probably saying we need to move beyond words. We need action at this time. Is that the sense you're getting?
Blaine, that is one of the many issues that South Africans, and particularly some within the political realm, are saying that time for action is now. Lip service on fighting issues of corruption is over. People like Tate John Nkadimeng had to witness their beloved movement, the Congress, the Tripartite Alliance, going through one of its most tumultuous times when it comes to the issues of corruption plaguing their own movement. You go to the diagnostic report that was given to the 2017 ANC's NASREC conference of the ANC and the corruption that's plaguing the governing party, and how it spoke about an ideological bankruptcy within the African National Congress members and branches. You look at the issues that are being raised by ANC stalwarts of corruption, and the ANC going off track and no longer pursuing what they termed the National Democratic Revolution, that was no longer on track and was being derailed by some of its own members. I'm just going to ask my colleague Kwazimanzi just to show you some of the activities that's currently taking place here also as well. And it's just going to go straight to the man that John Nkadimeng worked extensively within the trade union movement, who's currently seated in that black vehicle there, which is the President of the Republic of South Africa, who's tasked with the responsibility of rooting out corruption and addressing some of the concerns that these struggle stalwarts have, particularly when he delivers his eulogy today. He will have to touch on some of the various frustrations ANC stalwarts like Tate John Nkadimeng, Tate late Baba Andrew Mlangeni, Dennis Goldberg, who's also left as well and passed away earlier on this year, that they grew increasingly frustrated with when it comes to the issues of the governing party paying lip service to fighting of corruption. And you go back to some of the issues that have been raised with some of their own leaders. You go to Blaine with some of the riveting information that's coming out of the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. You heard the testimony of that particular hidden witness yesterday when it came to the issues of one of the former ministers carrying stashes of cash in the boot of his car, the bodyguard not knowing where these monies were coming from. You look at the sins of incumbency that is currently plaguing the governing party, and how these doyens of liberation like John Nkadimeng were not tainted by issues of corruption, issues of nepotism, issues of awarding tenders to their friends and close relatives. And you juxtaposed it to the current political system in the country and the current contemporary politics, which is currently encaving the governing party, and the sins of incumbency that some of these leaders are currently allegedly embroiled in. You look at the issues that were raised by the Secretary General of the African National Congress, which raised alarm bells in saying that none of the current ANC, NEC members can say they've never done business with the state, which raised many questions. Is many leaders at getting into RECs, PECs, and getting into the National Executive Committee and ultimately Cabinet of the Republic of South Africa in order to benefit financially for themselves and those who are close to them.
The generation of Nkadimeng, the generation of Mandela, Mlangeni, Kathrada, they seem to have shared or have a collective unity, How does that, I guess, compare to the current situation the ANC finds itself in?
When it comes to the issues of unity within the African National Congress, you've got to go in history and look at how the African National Congress had shaped itself. You go to the Cuba conference, which Ntate John Nkadimeng was part of, which was largely one of the most historic conferences of the African National Congress. Many people would like to characterize and link to that conference to the happenings of the Morogoro conference, which came about with the Hani Memorandum. They were part of a generation that spoke out against whatever misdeeds or misgivings were currently happening within the African National Congress. You go to the various conferences that have taken place within the African National Congress. You go to how ANC conferences over the years have never truly fractured and divided the ANC. You go to, for instance, the 1991 conference of the African National Congress at the Durban Westville campus, where Tate Nelson Mandela was elected as president of the ANC and Cyril Ramaphosa as the Secretary General of the ANC. You look at the fierce battle that was there between Thabo Mbeki and Chris Hani for the deputy presidency of the African National Congress, how the ANC was able to bring about these two particular leaders, talk to them in order to have them, both of them to move aside and to have another candidate come up as the deputy deputy president of the African National Congress, and the chairperson position was then brought about. The national chair position was then brought about within the African National Congress. The ANC, like other liberation movements like Chama Mapinduze, was able to sit down, discuss issues of leadership, pretty much like how the South African Communist Party goes about when they go to their elective conferences. They sit down, they discuss leadership, and they come up with a conclusion or resolution on how the leadership structure must be composed, as opposed to the current shootout and fierce contestation battles that are currently taking place, not only within the African National Congress. You go to the tumultuous period that the Congress movement, that the Congress of the African Trade Unions, COSATU, faced with that fierce battle of its former leaders. That would be the former General Secretary Zwelinzima Mavavi and its former President Dumo Dlamini, and how they were divided along the political and economic trajectory that the African National Congress was taken, and that how it ended up splitting that particular trade union, which was a beloved Congress movement of Tate John Nkadimeng. You'd also have to question what role did these former leaders and the founding members of COSATU, what role did they also play in trying to bring about unity within the South African working class, and particularly with going with that slogan of COSATU, one trade union, one federation, one country.
We have live visuals of what's behind Samkele there at Marks Park. The funeral services set to start at 10 o'clock. Let's put up some visuals there. Oh, this is inside, actually. This is inside the actual venue. Samkele, walk us through today's program. Samkele, can you hear us? All right, I'm not...
Yes, I can hear you, Blaine. I seem to have lost you there for a bit. Can you please just repeat that question?
All right, so it's something that you might be seeing from your vantage point. You may not, but the cortege is has almost arrived at Marks Park there. Just walk us through today's program. We understand it starts at 10 o'clock. Cyril Ramaphosa, President, will deliver the eulogy after 11 o'clock, we understand.
Yes, indeed. The President will deliver the eulogy after 11 o'clock. In fact, the cortege has just arrived here at Marks Park. It's currently making its way, and it will be received by the President of the African National Congress and the President of the Republic of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa. He will deliver the eulogy at about 11:05 this morning. You've got speakers such as the grandchild of Ntate Nkadimeng, Mr. John Nkadimeng. He will also be paying a tribute to his grandfather, and the children will be spoken by Mr. Calvin Nkadimeng, the child of Mr. John Nkadimeng. These are some of the speeches that will be taking place here today. The welcoming remarks will be done by the Premier of Gauteng and the provincial chairperson of the African National Congress in this economic hub of the country. That would be David Makura, who is also arrived here for the funeral service. We do know that the Cortege is here and the South African Armed Forces are also here, as it's the Category 1 funeral of Ndate John Nkadimeng here, and you can see that his remains are just about to be taken into this Marks Hall here, where the President will deliver the eulogy. And I'm just going to also you can see the President of the Republic of South Africa as well is they are just opening the door for his vehicle as well. He is also going to step out of his vehicle any time from now as well. But the funeral service of this struggle stalwart, this former trade unionist, this particular individual who fought for the liberation of this country, who did go to exile in Mozambique, who did go to exile in countries such as Zambia. You'd remember that the ANC used to have its headquarters in Lusaka as well. He did have a stint there as well and did go there for some training as well. The President will step out of his vehicle as well anytime from now to receive the remains of Ndate John Nkadimeng here for his official funeral, which is a Category 1, which was declared by the government of the day, led by the President, to speak about a man he worked extensively within the trade union movement and building of SACTU, the South African Congress of Trade Unions, which ultimately became the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU. You'd remember that at the time, the President as well was leading one of the most and fastest growing trade unions within the mining sector in the world, which at some point had close to about 380,000 members. That would be the National Union of Mine Workers, where he and the likes of Gwede Mantashe originate from. And you'd also link and have a sense of how the trade union movement has been influential in South African politics and giving us some of the leaders that we have today, some of them who are leading in various structures of government, whether it be the various provinces. You go to the executive of South Africa, which is cabinet, the likes of Gwede Mantashe, who is the Minister of Mineral Resources, the likes of Ibrahim Patel, who hails from the South African Clothing and Textile Workers Union, and you go to Thulas Mnisi, who comes from SATU, who is a principal by nature. It looks at the extent that the unions have played in the liberation of this country. You can see some of the visuals coming from our colleague Kwazi Manzi. Some of the family members are coming out of the cortege and the convoy that was coming from the family home and coming to this burial of their grandfather, Ndate John Nkadimeng.
You know, Samkele, many companies are retrenching workers as we speak. Jobs are on the line. Salaries are being cut. And no doubt, I guess, during today's funeral, we're going to get a window into how John Nkadimeng viewed the trade unions of today and the directions that unions are taking in fighting for the rights of workers.
Yes, indeed. The reflections will certainly be made about the fortunes of the trade unions today. You look at the various battles that are plaguing other trade unions within the Congress of African Trade Unions. You go to the split that happened in COSATU that ultimately led to Zwelinze Mavavi leaving and NUMSA being expelled, and the formation of SAFTU, which is the South African Federation of Trade Unions led by Zwelinze Mavavi as its General Secretary, who did spearhead and lead COSATU also through some of its most difficult periods, who did lead COSATU in one of the African National Congress's most difficult periods in 2007 in that fierce battle of former President Mbeki and his then Deputy President Jacob Zuma, which ultimately led to a split within the African National Congress and the formation of the Congress of the People, COPE, and how many big leaders or political heavyweights within the African National Congress having left and formed COPE. You look at the split within COSATU, you look at the fights within what we've seen now through the investment wings of these various unions, and how many people dubbed some of these unions as business unionism. And there you see the President of the Republic, Cyril Ramaphosa, going to greet General Shokwe there of the South African Armed Forces, and the President also going to the family of Ndade John Nkadimeng to receive them for this official burial or funeral of Ndade John Nkadimeng, a revered trade unionist, a revered ambassador, a person who played a pivotal role in the liberation struggle of this country and in the liberation of workers and fighting for worker issues, raising issues. You look at the current quality of shop stewards within these trade unions. You look, for instance, we're just commemorating the Marikana massacre yesterday, and you look at the role that the Congress of South African Trade Unions played within that particular massacre, the role that this incumbent president played as a non-executive director of Lonmin at the time, and that email that he sent out of concomitant action against those illegal strikers at Lonmin, and how he is also blamed for the massacre of those mine workers. You juxtapose that to the rich history that the African National Congress has when it comes to worker issues and fighting for the liberation of this country, and you compare it to some of the issues that are plaguing the trade union movement. For instance, I'll bring in POPRU, the police union, and how they are fighting over the investment wing of that particular company. You go to the transport union, SATAU, within the trade union and COSATU movement, which is also fighting over issues of their investment wing. You can see live visuals there of President Cyril Ramaphosa walking alongside the family of Ndade John Nkadimeng. You can also see there amongst the family is the Secretary General of the African National Congress, Ace Magashule, is amongst them as well. These are some of the familiar faces who are accompanying the Nkadimeng family as they lay their father, their grandfather, their uncle to rest today. And one must also point out that COVID-19 restrictions and regulations put and placed by government are being adhered to in this funeral of Dade John Nkadimeng, as opposed to the visuals we saw when Dade Andrew Mlange's remains were arriving in his family home and the case being opened here. But it seems as if this time around the governing party and the family of Nkadimeng has been very strict when it comes to the adherence of COVID-19 regulations.
Well, speaking about COVID-19 regulations, many people are expecting to hear from the president with regards to the trajectory that South Africa is currently on with regards to the infection rate. We know that the National Economic Development and Labour Council, NEDLAC, comprising of government, labor, business and community as social partners, have set up a high-level working team to finalize an urgent economic recovery program for South Africa, possibly apart from dealing with how the life and times of John Nkadimeng has shaped South Africa. The president might touch on where we are as a country in terms of the fight against the coronavirus.
Indeed, the president will most likely touch on the times and the current situation that we are going through as a country when it comes to the fight of COVID-19, this particular pandemic which is wreaking havoc not only socially but also wreaking havoc economically for many families. Many families are losing their loved ones. Families are also losing their jobs. Many families, some families have one household with one income. Some of that singular income is also being taken away with the various retrenchments that are taking place, not only within the private sector, but also within the public sector. We as well, within the South African Broadcasting Corporation, are going through our own retrenchment process. There's a retrenchment process going on at the South African Airways. There's a retrenchment process going on in other state-owned enterprises. You go to the issues that are plaguing South Africa, such as the one singular threat to the economy of this country, which is the power utility, Eskom, and load shedding that is there. In fact, earlier on when we arrived here at Marks Park, there was load shedding as well. They had to kickstart their various generators that they had. But South Africa is going through, and the world is going through, one of its most difficult periods of this particular pandemic of COVID-19. I'm just going to step out of shot, Blaine, as the remains of Ndate John Nkadimeng are about to be taken to the hall where the service for his funeral will take place. The revered trade unionist, ambassador, liberation icon will be laid to rest today at a time where his country is faced with a pandemic, where the economy is in the doldrums, where the unions, where he comes from, where it was his forte when it comes to the issues of his political consciousness, will have to rise up, defend workers, but also work in line to make sure that the various companies that employ the downtrodden, the poor, the working class, do not close their doors, which will ultimately lead to more retrenchments than is currently facing the country when it comes to the issues of various companies downscaling their operations and ultimately of laying off workers. So the President, COSATU, the South African Communist Party, SANCO, the alliance as a whole needs to stand up in honor of the likes of Ndate John Nkadimeng, the likes of Dr. Andrew Mlangeni, Dennis Goldberg, the Rivonia Trialists. Many people have dubbed that those who are part of the Rivonia Trialists as the A-team of the African National Congress. The current leaders have to stand up and defend their legacy and take the spear and usher this country to greater prosperity in fighting of this particular pandemic. And the President is due to address the nation sometime this week. As you know, that the state of disaster, which was extended, ends this weekend, and ultimately means that the President will have to address the nation on the way forward, whether we go to level 2 of the lockdown or they maintain an advanced level 3 of the lockdown, or they scrap the lockdown as a whole. But with the rising infections that we are currently seeing, one can only guess what the cabinet will decide. Remember that the President has to make other announcements recently, such as the banning of alcohol again. There's the litigation issues by the tobacco industry companies on the ban of cigarettes or tobacco products in the country. You've got trade unions who've also spoken out against the corruption that's currently taking place when it comes to the procurement of personal protection equipment, PPEs, that has sent a dark cloud over government's efforts to fight this particular pandemic of COVID-19, which also saw the suspension of the official spokesperson of President Ramaphosa, and how that has tainted the office of the presidency, and it brings about the issues of corruption that has now bedeviled this beloved organization of Ndate John Nkadimeng.
And I guess the caveat would be, Samkele, that we still need to be guarded with regards to COVID-19. Although the rate of infections might be low at this stage, the concern is the second wave. And you've seen what happens in countries in Europe like France and like Spain, who are seeing spikes after certain easing of lockdown. So that warning is still there, that we can't let our guard down at this stage of fear of a second wave.
Indeed, South Africa can't let its guard down, and the executive of the country led by President Ramaphosa is tasked with that responsibility. You'd remember that the easing of the lockdown, the reopening of schools saw a spike in the number of infections, and schools had to be closed for about a month. Matriculants who needed that much needed time back in the classrooms had to take a break again. They've recently just gone back. You look at the various grades that have not gone back to school, but I'm just going to pause on those issues of COVID-19. As you can see, the remains of Ntate John Nkadimeng now being hoisted by the South African Armed Forces as the remains are about to go inside the hall for the official burial and service, funeral service of Ntate John Nkadimeng. You remember the president gave a Category 1 funeral for the struggle stalwart, for the ambassador of South Africa.
At this stage, let's just pause and take in these visuals. Live visuals from Marks Park, the funeral service of the late John Nkadimeng. President Cyril Ramaphosa declaring a special official funeral, Category 1, to honor the late struggle stalwart and esteemed member of the Order of Luthuli in Gold, John Nkadimeng. I want to bring back Samkele, Maseko, as we watch these visuals of the coffin entering the venue. The official proceedings were scheduled to start at 10 o'clock, running a bit early, but no doubt we're going to hear about the remarkable veteran of our country's liberation struggle, who was a selfless and courageous stalwart who contributed immensely to South Africa's democracy. Those are not my words. Those are the words of President Cyril Ramaphosa. And Tata Nkadimeng was among the 156 Congress activists who were detained during the Defiance campaign in 1952 and charged with treason in the 1956 treason trial. He also went to exile, taking refuge in numerous neighboring countries.
Yep.